Merci beaucoup. Uh, so Canadians love their dogs. About 1 in 5 Canadians have a dog. I've got a dog myself. He's a little dog named Bala. He's a Maltese. And we also love going and visiting our neighbors, whether or not it's for tourism or it's for visiting family or for business. Roughly 400,000 Canadians a day go to the U.S. And when you think about the fact that around 20% of them have a dog, that's a big number of dogs. Conversely, around 3 million Americans a quarter come to Canada and also have the same number of dogs. So the American love affair with dogs is just as intense. And the tourism between our two countries is enormous. I was just in the United States talking about the fact that in the last quarter, Q4, it was $6 billion in tourism. So I'm quite concerned, if I'm honest, about the regulations that are being brought in by the United States, requiring, as of August 1st, a number of new measures for folks bringing their dogs across the border. As people would be aware today, when you drive across the border with your dog, there's not a lot of questions. You're able to go back and forth, and that makes a good deal of sense because Canada isn't a source country for rabies. We are a rabies-free country. We have a policy environment that's very similar to the American policy environment. So a dog coming from Chicago or coming from Portland is no more of a risk than a dog coming from Toronto or from Vancouver. I understand why the Americans have created this policy writ large. They want to continue to protect their country against rabies, as do we. But we believe it makes sense to have a policy that protects our hemisphere rather than having individual policies for two different countries. And let me be very specific. First of all, in my conversation with Secretary Becerra last week, I was able to go to Washington and speak to the Secretary and a number of legislators. There are a couple of important changes that we have been able to extract, but they're not enough. In the first order, we've gotten very positive indications. We're waiting on confirmation that there's going to be a grace period where folks are given a warning at the border for the first couple of months so that they don't just have this policy jumped on them. August 1st is very, very close. In the second order, the CDC has removed the requirement for CFIA to validate independently the veterinary certificates. That was going to be a massive problem for us administratively. They've removed the requirement for a specific ISO microchip and now are accepting any type of microchip that works, sort of modern microchip that people would have in their dog. And they're allowing a Canadian-specific form that will be valid as long as the rabies vaccination is valid. Unfortunately, there are some things that the U.S. is still requiring. For any crossing now, they're going to have a CDC-specific form that you have to use every time, where they're going to have to, and I just pick on my dog Bala. So if I show up at the border with Bala, they're going to have to look at a photo and look at Bala and be comparing, is Bala the right dog? Just frankly, I don't think this is a good use of border officers' time. So there's a lot of issues at the border, whether or not, my Maltese is another Maltese, and having a border officer figure that out, I've said to the Secretary, doesn't make sense to me. Secondly, we're all for proof of vaccination. Every dog in Canada should be vaccinated against rabies. But having these forms done by veterinarians in Canada is going to take a lot of time to get that validated, as well as making sure all dogs have this chip. It's going to cost a lot of money. So what am I asking for? An exemption. I've been very clear with the Secretary. I think Canada should be exempt as a country that is not a source country for rabies, and that we should work more closely on policy parity, but certainly making sure that this policy in the first order, and we've gotten very positive signals, does not come into force and effect on the 1st of August is exceptionally important. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
So we're going to go with one question, one follow-up, and we'll start with Stephen Hoff from CBC.
Hi, thanks for taking our questions. First of all, how has this come as such a surprise? How are we caught off guard? I mean, many veterinarians that we've talked to, many Canadian dog owners, many people in this business say that this came out of left field. There wasn't good communication. So how did that how did that part of this happen?
Well, the policy that was brought forward by CDC was a complete surprise to us. The Americans adopted this as a blanket policy for all countries. I don't think they thought about what they were creating at the Canadian-U.S. border. So it came as much as a surprise to us as it did to the U.S. I'll be frank, when I first heard it, I thought, well, this can't be serious. Like, you know, they're clearly going to be creating an exemption. And that's, you know, when I'm talking to U.S. legislators, particularly those that are on the border, they agree. So I remain hopeful that logic will prevail here. But we are as surprised and blindsided as I think all the folks that you're talking about in the country. And part of the reason I didn't come to a microphone to kind of sound the alarm is because I was hopeful in my trip to Washington that we would make more progress than we did. We made good progress. I think this significantly improves the situation, but it's not enough.
And if you can't secure an exemption, are you going to do the same thing? Are you going to ask for the same sort of documentation for Americans who are coming to Canada with their dogs?
Well, at this stage, I'm not going to jump sort of to a hypothetical. I think that we are both countries that have done a phenomenal job at keeping rabies out of our country and making sure that our dogs are safe. So I believe saner heads are going to prevail here. This was a policy decision. I don't think that it was thought through very well. I think that Americans are going to, look, we got a ton of Americans up here right now during the summer, and most of them are up with their dog, and a lot of them have no idea that this August 1st date is coming. And they're going to be looking to come home with, you know, with their dog, and what are they going to do? Right? They're going to be stuck. They're not going to be able to go home. So I think this was a very poorly thought out bit of business, and it's going to have a huge impact for Americans. So we are squarely focused on continuing to get these concessions, extremely important ones in the first order, particularly getting that grace period, because that can buy us some more time to kind of get to have a conversation around policy parity. But I'm not going to, at this point, entertain anything other than fighting for that exemption.
David Aiken, Global News.
Good morning, Minister. Good to see you. I have a bit of a different subject matter. I know I should probably be asking Minister Holland about this, but you're here and she's not around this week. Civil service has grown 43% since you guys have been in office. It decreased every year the last 5 years of Harper. Your department's grown. PHAC's doubled in size. I know we had a pandemic, but it's still twice as big now. I don't know. What do you think? 43% increase in the civil service population in the country's only increased like 15% in the last few years. Do you have some thoughts about that? Is it a good thing, bad thing? It's just the thing?
Sure. Well, I'll speak about it from a health perspective, if I could, David. So from a health perspective, and let's talk about the Public Health Agency, you're absolutely right. We had a pandemic, and we're scaling down after the pandemic. But we're, with respect to pandemic preparedness, and again, this is another issue that Secretary Becerra and I spoke about, there needs to be continued vigilance. And there's a recognition that to ensure that we don't have the same kind of impacts that we saw during COVID, that the Public Health Agency has to be resourced appropriately. In the second order, there's no question in health we're more ambitious. You know, we have a oral health branch that didn't exist before. Rolling out dental care is the largest federal program that's ever been rolled out, and you know I don't mind an opportunity to talk about it. We have over 250,000 participating or seniors who've gotten care, and next week we're going to have, I think, very exciting information about how this new pathway is working with oral health professionals. Look, this is a very challenging time on the planet. I don't care where you live. And there are two different philosophies. One philosophy is you're on your own, good luck, you know, walk into the wind and what will happen to you will happen to you, or we're in this together. And that we have to stand shoulder to shoulder in the difficult times that we're in, and government has a larger role to play. I think in COVID we saw that. In healthcare, certainly I see it every day. I'm sure there'll be other questions around jurisdiction, or maybe there won't today. There often is. But who is going to coordinate this? You know, I see different provinces that are doing great things in health, but there has to be a convening role to pull that together. So, you know, if you're asking, is it a good or bad thing that government is more ambitious? I think it's a good thing, but it has to be measured against results. So you have to be able to see that the investments we're making are making a material difference in the lives of Canadians. So I think I'm well placed to speak about the difference we're making in health. And then I would leave it to you to maybe to Minister Anand for a broader question outside of health. I could give you a reflection on that, but I think they would be better placed to other ministers.
Okay, good enough. And you mentioned coordination, so now let's go to think about Halifax, the Premier's meeting. You probably heard Premier Eby yesterday actually complained about the lack of, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, lack of federal leadership to coordinate discussions on training and recruitment in the healthcare sector. He thinks, I don't know if this is news to you, but he's, in addition, of course, they all want more money, but they'd like some leadership on coordinating recruitment and training in healthcare.
That's fantastic, and I'm all here for it. Look, I think we've had a lot of conversations. I want to say Adrian Dix and I have worked very closely on this and all issues. And if they want that collaboration to go deeper, I'm all for it. My instinct here is that Canadians don't want to hear us talk about jurisdiction and point fingers at each other. They want us to focus on solutions. We've made huge headway when it comes to foreign credential recognition, on recruitment, on health workforce. You take a look at with the College of Physicians and Surgeons taking what was months and months and months, getting that down to less than 90 days. You look in Charlottetown, the commitment we made together on a 90-day service standard for recognition of foreign credentials, again, processes that took months and months and months. We just met as health ministers about 2 months ago where this was a topic of discussion. Anytime health provinces are saying they want to work more closely with us, I think that's fantastic news, and I'm all for it.
Sarah from Canadian Press.
Given the disturbing incident in the United States a couple of days ago, I'm just wondering if you can tell us how you're feeling about the security of politicians in this country. Do you feel that more needs to be done, or are you guys talking as a caucus, as a government, about what more needs to be done to protect politicians?
There's no question this is on all of our minds. What we witnessed in the United States was terrifying and really a disgusting act of violence that is vile and reprehensible in every way. It is essential in democracies that we settle our differences, at ballot boxes and in chambers of parliament, or legislators, or in in legislative chambers. Look, I have all kinds of experiences where people come up to me. I was on a run on a rural road on a weekend and got cut off by a pickup truck. Somebody getting out, very angry. That stuff can be scary. Turned out it was a great conversation. I think all of us need to take a step back. There is, I've spoken a lot about this when I was House Leader. We can't stop the important conversations about what our policy differences are, and those are going to be aggressive. But the personal characterizations, the personal motives that we impugn one another with, I think that we all have to be careful about that. But it can be very difficult because the positions that are held are extremely different. And in a democracy, people have to be able to speak their mind, and particularly do so vociferously. But social media and the anonymity and the toxicity of these comments, I think about it a lot, and how we can do a better job, being more direct with people and trying to avoid, personal slurs or things that might be incendiary. But I think as a society, hopefully that's a bit of a wake-up call. The United States is different than us, but not that different. And the fact that violence is percolating so close to the bottom that we see something happen like what we saw in Washington is something that I think all of us need to think about. How are we treating one another? How are we talking to one another? It's not just political actors, it's everybody. And I think it's very disappointing as a human being to go on social media and see the way people are talking to each other and what is deemed to be acceptable in how people are talking to each other. And the fact that that's bleeding out into real life is not surprising, but hopefully it's a bit of a moment for us all to look in the mirror and think about, how we're interacting with one another on a day-to-day basis as human beings.
Just to follow up on that, you talk about personal responsibility in the kind of conversations that happen online. That kind of stuff bleeds out into our legislatures too. It bleeds out into Parliament and question period in particular, and the way that our leadership interacts with one another. So what responsibility do you guys bear as leaders of this country to change the rhetoric?
Well, I'll talk very personally. I was in opposition, and I've reflected publicly many times that I think I got it wrong in a number of different instances in terms of the line you're talking about and the temperature, and that I try in all of my engagements, whether or not speaking in Parliament or in a media exchange like this, to really think deeply about how can I present my case in a way that's fact-based and kind of, make sure that I'm not too incendiary and that I don't, get too passionate and kind of overstate things. I'm a human being. Sometimes I get those things wrong. But I think we as a society absolutely deserve leaders who are being very careful in the way that they're presenting information, and that they avoid being incendiary or over the top, and that are staying rested in facts, and that we have to hold one another to account for that. I think one of the challenges, and you see this, I won't pick on individuals, but there are certain folks, and you guys would know them, who love an over-the-top statement, and then they put it on to social media, and it's out of its context. I'll just give a case in point. I made a comment when I was talking very specifically about a conservative policy on that you'd have to drive 44,000 kilometers to get the benefit that they were promising. And so I was joking around about that, about how many days you'd have to spend in the car in order to get their benefit, and that the cost of it was eliminating action on climate. And it was taken out of context and it was put online. And so I've gotten a couple of people come up to me very, very angry, right? Well, you're against my family taking a road trip. I said, well, who said that? Well, Andrew Scheer said you didn't, this is so irresponsible, you're against road trips. Well, come on. That's not what I said. And that is really problematic when we totally mischaracterize one another's comments for political gain. Now, I'm sure somebody will go over my time in opposition and say, Mark, well, you did that in this time or that time. And I like to think that I didn't do it. I certainly never did it intentionally. But in my rhetorical flourish, did I create a circumstance that, maybe I was saying something that I should have been more careful about, that would keep it more grounded in the facts? I think so. And I think that there should be a greater responsibility and a greater consequence when any of us so distantly wander from facts to create anger that is manufactured and not real.
Avant de passer aux questions en ligne, je me permets une question, Valérie Gamache de Radio-Canada. J'aimerais vous entendre sur cette période de grâce aux douanes, à ces gens qui se présenteront avec un chien. Est-ce que vous pouvez garantir à des familles qui iront en vacances, qui ont par exemple un chien d'assistance, un chien Mira?
Oui, c'est mon point.
Est-ce que vous pouvez les assurer qu'ils pourront passer les douanes?
Ça m'inquiète beaucoup. C'est un grand enjeu, vraiment. C'est pour un chien qui aide un individu ou une famille. C'est pas une question de quelque chose qui est bon, c'est quelque chose qui est essentiel pour lui. Par exemple, chaque jour, il y a environ 40 chiens chaque jour qui traversent le frontière par avion. Et dans cette situation-là, il y a 15 qui sont les chiens d'aide quelqu'un médicalement et qui est absolument essentiel. Et quand j'ai parlé avec monsieur le secrétaire, j'ai expliqué que ça, c'est quelque chose de vraiment essentiel. Et si c'est possible de créer une exemption seulement pour ça, ça améliore la situation beaucoup. Parce que c'est pas juste pas de tout. Pour une famille qui a besoin d'un chien pour une raison médicale, de créer une situation comme ça, c'est pas acceptable.
Et est-ce qu'au 1er août, ça va bel et bien s'appliquer ou il y a une période où on va laisser quand même les chiens circuler?
Maintenant, il semble qu'il va y avoir une période de grâce de quelques mois. Ce n'est pas une grande période de temps, mais pour moi, c'est vraiment important parce que c'est le 1er août, c'est vraiment proche et il n'y a pas beaucoup de temps pour les personnes de faire des choses en avance pour une vacance ou quelque chose comme ça. Alors, il semble que ça va être le cas. Mais je n'ai pas la vérification pour ça, mais il semble que c'est probablement le cas.
Alors maintenant, on passe en ligne à Chloé Bouquin de la presse. Chloé, est-ce que tu...
Oui, moi.
OK, parfait. On t'entend bien.
Oui, demandé par aux spécifiques formes de site dont vous aviez parlé. Vous avez dit qu'il va falloir en produire un à chaque fois, et je m'étais demandé, ça veut dire qu'il faut retourner chez le vétérinaire si, par exemple, on va 2 fois aux États-Unis pendant le mois. Est-ce qu'il faut aller 2 fois chez son vétérinaire, faire à chaque fois ce formulaire-là spécifique?
J'ai manqué le début des questions, malheureusement. Il y a eu un problème avec le...
Peux-tu répéter la question, Chloé, s'il te plaît?
Oui, on a parlé d'un formulaire spécifique à faire remplir à chaque fois qu'on devait franchir la frontière. Et je me demandais si ce formulaire-là allait être valable pendant un certain temps ou est-ce qu'il fallait retourner à chaque fois chez son vétérinaire, refaire un formulaire, même si on traverse la frontière 2 fois dans le même mois, par exemple.
Malheureusement, maintenant, c'est le cas, même si avec le changement, il y a une obligation de l'utiliser, le formulaire, dans chaque instance. Alors, même si quelqu'un arrive aux frontières deux ou 3 ou 4 fois par mois, il y a une obligation chaque mois de l'utiliser, le formulaire, et pour moi, ce n'est pas acceptable. Et pas juste le formulaire, comme j'ai déjà expliqué, il y a une obligation pour l'agent aux frontières de vérifier le chien. Et ça va prendre beaucoup de temps. Et pour moi, ce n'est pas une bonne utilisation de temps pour l'agent.
Mais ma question, c'était plutôt, est-ce que ce formulaire-là, c'est un vétérinaire qui doit le remplir ou est-ce que c'est juste un formulaire à imprimer et qu'on peut remplir chez soi?
Il y a 2 types de formulaires. Il y a un type qui est spécifiquement là pour le Canada et ça demande une professionnelle, une vétérinaire de remplir le formulaire. Et ce formulaire-là est plus complexe et ça dure pour toute la duration de la vaccination. Il y a un autre type de formulaire qui est présent aux frontières, qui est plus simple, et c'est possible de l'utiliser le formulaire quand la personne arrive. Je pense qu'il n'y a pas une obligation en avance de remplir, de l'utiliser le formulaire. C'est moins complexe, mais quand même, ça prend le temps et pas juste pour le Canadien ou le Canadienne, mais aussi pour l'agent.
D'accord.
Alors, on va y aller avec Roxane Lachapelle du Devoir. Oh. C'est ma faute.
En fait, j'aurais une question par rapport. Oui, bonjour. Roxane Lachapelle du Devoir. Je me demande en fait comment se différencient les politiques pour les chiens qui entrent aux États-Unis comparativement aux chiens qui entrent au Canada. Est-ce que vraiment la politique se différencie beaucoup d'un côté à l'autre de la frontière?
Pour moi, c'est la création de la politique là pour les chiens. C'est une création. C'est pas. Je pense que c'est pas intentionnel. C'était une action du gouvernement de l'États-Unis qui bloque un problème à l'extérieur du pays qui n'existait pas au Canada. Et je pense que malheureusement, les personnes qui ont créé le politique ne pensent pas aux conséquences pour le Canada. Mais c'est pas C'est pas une représentation une stratégie plus grande que ça.
As-tu une question de suivi, Roxane?
Oui, en fait, ce serait pour savoir, est-ce que ces politiques, en fait, comment ressemblent les politiques qui viennent par rapport aux chiens, qui viennent des États-Unis pour entrer au Canada? Comment se formulent ces
C'est pour
propositions-là?
moi, c'est évident aujourd'hui qu'il n'y a pas de problème avec les chiens qui viennent les États-Unis ou Canada. Les deux juridictions n'avaient pas un problème avec les rabbis, pas de tout. Et ça, c'est la raison pour laquelle je pense que c'est bon de créer une politique pour les deux pays en commune. Et ça, c'est mon but.
Okay, now we'll go to Colin Slark from the Brandon Sun. Colin, do you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. Minister, here in our corner of southwestern Manitoba, we have a veterinarian shortage. What concerns do you have that these extra paperworks and tests will overwhelm veterinarians in different parts of the country?
I'm very concerned. Veterinarians have a lot of things that need to be done. This is something, frankly, that checks a box that doesn't need to be checked. It's fixing a problem that doesn't exist. I want to thank the Prime Minister for his advocacy, and obviously I'm doing everything I can, talking to legislators, going down to the United States, meeting with the Secretary. I'm very hopeful that that's going to yield results, because let me be more specific about some of the complications here. Let's talk about transportation. Long-haul truckers, about a quarter of them travel with dogs. Suddenly they're going to be in a position where they can't cross the border. A lot of them are going to refuse to go. That could create problems for the supply chain of both countries. We don't need that problem. The amount, I mentioned the dollar and the amount of money in tourism. There's a lot of people who can just say, well, I'm not going to take that trip, right? Either to Canada or to the United States. So it can hurt both of our countries that way. And we have a lot of folks who come north in the summer who are up here right now, and a lot of folks who go south. That doesn't speak to, all of the other issues that are around this. And you can imagine all of those people are going to hear this story and they're going to go clamoring to veterinarians who are already busy. That's a big problem, and I'm very worried about that, and particularly for smaller and more rural communities where there's only one vet for an entire community.
Thank you. And quick follow-up, forgive me if you've already answered this, but do you have any follow-up meetings scheduled with your colleagues in the United States government at this point?
Well, I want to thank the folks at CFIA who've been fantastic working with their counterparts, and the Health Canada and PHAC officials that are working with their counterparts every day. These are conversations that are happening every day, sort of from administration to administration basis, both from within our department and their department, and also at a political level. We're communicating with Secretary Becerra's office our appreciation of the changes, because the changes that were made are exceptionally helpful. I frankly would say that without those changes, this would be a much worse situation. And I thank the Secretary for those changes. But we're going to continue pressing. We're not going to let go. I think that for particularly border communities, I had a good conversation at the embassy. I know the embassy is working as well, reaching out to legislators to have them understand how it's going to affect their communities. I had an opportunity to talk to a representative in Florida, as an example, about how much it's going to affect their state. So, the good news here is it affects so many people in so many ways for absolutely no reason, that I really do believe that cooler heads and saner heads will prevail. But those conversations are continuing really every day.
Katie Dangerfield, Global News.
Good morning. This question is for Minister Holland. It's unrelated to the dog regulations, but since 2016, your government has repeatedly committed to introduce regulations that would be meaningfully limit how unhealthy foods are advertised to kids online. The Heart and Stroke Foundation has put up signage in and around Parliament Hill, calling on the Prime Minister to take action and finish the job. These regulations have not moved forward despite repeated promises, and time is running out to get them introduced should an election be called. Can you provide clarity on where this process is at and if regulations will be introduced by the end of summer?
Well, thank you so much. So in the first order, I completely agree with its importance. It wasn't just a matter of a commitment we made, but you know, I worked for Heart and Stroke, as many of you might know. I was the head of their Ontario mission and their national director for children and youth. And seeing how impactful it was in Quebec to restrict marketing of unhealthy foods to children, you know, this is something that I really want to see get done. We're a long way through the sort of procedural checks that need to happen, but there's still a few more to go to get this put into force and effect. But I can say that I'm absolutely committed to doing everything I can to seeing this introduced as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
You don't have any follow-up, Katie?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're gonna go again in French with Pascal Lévesque. I just lost Pascal Lévesque du Soleil.
J'ai peut-être manqué une partie, mais donc, est-ce qu'il faut faire approuver, comme on le fait pour l'Europe, puis l'Australie et l'Angleterre, le formulaire rempli par le vétérinaire à l'Agence canadienne d'inspection des aliments?
Maintenant, c'est pour des autres pays, les pays comme l'Angleterre et des autres pays, il y a des régulations pour entrer le pays, mais je ne suis pas certain spécifiquement qu'est-ce que c'est la régulation pour ça. Mais peut-être je peux répondre aussitôt que possible, aussi rapide que possible avec l'information pour vous.
Je me demandais pour le formulaire américain, est-ce qu'il va falloir se rendre dans un bureau de l'Agence canadienne d'inspection des aliments pour faire étamper notre document comme c'est le cas pour les autres pays?
Oui, c'est absolument le cas pour les autres pays. Ce n'est pas une politique pour Canada spécifiquement, c'est une politique pour tous les autres pays. Alors, ça crée une implication absolument pour l'Angleterre et pour des autres pays, pour les États-Unis, absolument.
Okay, mais vas-y, Pascal.
Oui, c'est ça. Donc, mais au retour, est-ce qu'il va falloir faire vérifier ce document-là par le douanier canadien et payer des frais, comme c'est le cas quand on revient d'Europe pour les États-Unis?
Alors, c'est juste pour la clarification, si il y a une escale aux États-Unis et quand les chiens, pour quelqu'un qui va aller à l'Europe, par exemple, est-ce qu'il y a une obligation pour l'utilisation de formulaires? S'il y a une escale, particulièrement s'il y a une personne qui avait un chien pour aider la personne dans un sens médical, mon compréhension que oui, ça c'est le cas, c'est une obligation, même si c'est juste une escale. Alors, ça va créer des problèmes absolument pour les personnes qui veulent aller à l'Europe aussi.
Mais en fait, la question de Pascal, c'est à savoir, est-ce que ce sera la même chose? Est-ce que lorsque les chiens reviendront des États-Unis, ils devront faire approuver ce formulaire-là par des douaniers canadiens?
OK. Si il y a un chien qui arrive aux États-Unis, il y a une obligation pour n'importe quel pays, pour les personnes, de l'utiliser le formulaire. Oui, absolument, ça c'est le cas. S'il y a un chien quelqu'un veut aller à l'Europe et il y a une escale, par exemple, il y a une obligation de l'utiliser le form aussi.
Merci. C'est ce qui conclut cette conférence de presse. Je vous souhaite une bonne journée. Merci, M. le ministre. Bon été.
Merci beaucoup. Bon été.